What happens when the world's deadliest warriors get wounded in battle? Do they get left behind to die, or do they have something better? Today, we're discovering how the Mongols treated their injured soldiers, from shocking field amputations to the fermented mare's milk used to clean wounds. Welcome to Mongol Madness. Blood brothers. Unlike most medieval armies who left their wounded to die, the Mongols actually tried to save them. Training a Mongol warrior took years, riding since age 3, archery since age 5. You couldn't replace them with peasant conscripts. Every warrior was valuable. According to John of Plano Carpini, the Mongol military code was brutal. If one man fled, his whole unit was executed. But there was an exception. If you stopped to help a wounded comrade, you weren't punished. You could be rewarded. The Armenian historian Kyriakos Ganzaketsi saw Mongol soldiers risking their lives under enemy fire to drag wounded companions to safety. Rashid al-Din wrote that Mongol armies had 50 to 60 men trained in treating wounds, practical men who knew how to stop bleeding and extract arrows. Ride or die. When a warrior fell wounded, companions would tie him across a spare horse. Every Mongol warrior had 3 or 4 horses, so one could serve as a mobile stretcher. Juvaini wrote they were, quote, fastened to the horse with leather straps so they would not fall. But if a warrior was too badly wounded and the battle was going poorly, his companions would kill him rather than let him be captured. This was mercy. Capture meant torture and execution. The cutting-edge Mongol warfare produced devastating injuries. Their composite bows weren't like simple wooden bows. They were sophisticated weapons made from layers of horn, wood, and sinew. At close range, they could punch through armor like it wasn't even there. The Chinese writer Meng Hong noted that Mongol arrows could pierce a man completely, going in the front and coming out the back. And here's something that made these wounds even worse. Mongol arrows often had barbed heads. If you tried to pull one out the way it went in, those barbs would tear through flesh and muscle, causing massive internal damage. So the only safe way to remove a barbed arrow was to push it all the way through and out the other side. Imagine that for a moment. An arrow in your shoulder, and the doctor tells you the only way to get it out is to drive it deeper first. Mongol sabers were designed specifically for slashing from horseback, and they could cut terrifyingly deep. The Russian chronicles from the 1230s describe warriors with slash wounds that went all the way to the bone. One chronicle describes a man whose face was split open from forehead to jaw. He lived for 2 days before dying. But you know what caused the most crippling injuries? Being trampled. When thousands of horses charged across a battlefield, anyone who fell was crushed under their hooves. Hands, feet, ribs, all could be shattered in seconds. Marco Polo wrote about seeing former soldiers throughout the empire missing fingers or entire hands from being trampled. A night of blood. Let me tell you about one arrow wound that changed history. During a battle against the Taichi Ud tribe, a warrior named Temujin was struck in the neck. Blood pumped steadily from the wound. His companion Jelme stayed behind while the army withdrew. They were alone on the battlefield as night fell, Temujin bleeding and unable to move. The secret history tells us what happened next. Jelme put his mouth directly on the wound and began sucking out the blood. Not just fresh blood, but the clotted blood blocking proper healing. All night long, Jelme sucked and spat, cleaning the wound with his mouth, keeping Temujin alive one mouthful at a time. Imagine spending an entire night in enemy territory with your mouth pressed against a bleeding wound, sucking out blood for hours. When morning came, Temujin woke to see Jelme's face covered in blood. Around them were pools of blood and clots Jelme had been spitting out all night. Temujin was weak. He asked for water. Jelme snuck into the enemy camp and stole airag, fermented mare's milk, then snuck back without being caught. Temujin drank it and survived. Years later, when he became Genghis Khan, he never forgot. Gelmi became one of his most trusted generals, given command of armies and vast territories, all because he spent one night sucking blood from a wound. This shows everything about Mongol battlefield medicine. Crude, brutal, but intensely practical. Stitch in bleeding wounds, they applied paste of crushed herbs and animal fat. For severe bleeding, they cauterized with hot iron. Rashid al-Din wrote, quote, "The Mongol doctors heat an iron rod until it glows red, then press it firmly against the bleeding vessel." There was no anesthesia. The Chinese observer Li Gao watched them cauterize a severed arm stump. The warrior didn't flinch. Li Gao wrote, he quote, "Could not understand how they endured such pain without crying out. For arrows, they poured arag into the wound, used metal pincers to pull out the arrow in one motion, then packed the wound with animal fat and crushed garlic." Fermented medicine. The Mongols believed arag had medicinal properties, and modern science proves they weren't entirely wrong. Analysis shows it contains probiotics and mild antibiotic properties. But the Mongols took it further. William of Rubruck noted they didn't just pour it into wounds, they would mix it with crushed herbs to create pastes, or sometimes even mix it with horse blood to create a drink they forced wounded warriors to consume. The idea was that the horse's strength would transfer to the injured man. Rubruck watched them pour arag into wounds, make injured soldiers drink large quantities, and use it to wash surgical instruments. He was skeptical at first, but he admitted that wounds treated this way seemed to heal faster. The Chinese physician Wang Wei was even more skeptical. As a learned physician trained in traditional Chinese medicine, he thought Mongol methods were primitive nonsense. But after years of observation, he had to admit something strange. Wounded soldiers treated with arag developed infections significantly less frequently than those treated with traditional Chinese medicines. He wrote, quote, "Although their medicine is crude, and their practices would make any learned physician weep, one cannot argue with their results. I have seen men with terrible wounds survive who should have died, and I can offer no explanation except that their fermented mare's milk possesses properties we do not yet understand." For broken bones, the Mongols had surprisingly effective techniques. They would set the bone, forcing it back into alignment, then immobilize it with splints made from thin strips of wood bound tightly with leather. Sometimes they would heat tree resin until it became pliable, mold it around the break, and let it harden into a cast. But if a bone break was too severe, particularly in a leg where the bone had shattered into multiple pieces, there was only one option: amputation. And it had to be done fast, before infection set in. Hak and Hope Hamdallah Mustafi described witnessing a battlefield amputation. A warrior's leg bone was shattered. The man knew what was coming. He'd seen it done to others. He looked at his mangled leg and simply nodded. He was ready. The medical attendant placed a leather tourniquet above the knee, had 4 men hold the warrior down, and used a sword to cut through the leg in one stroke. The procedure took less than a minute. The stump was pressed against red-hot iron to seal it. Mustafi wrote the warrior, quote, "made no sound during the entire procedure, though his face went pale and sweat poured from him." But what happened the next day? The warrior would watch other men walk past on 2 legs while he had only 1. Some adjusted. Others would sit alone, staring at where their leg used to be, knowing their warrior life was over. Survival rates were surprisingly high because of speed and immediate cauterization. Several Mongol generals lost limbs but continued commanding. General Jurgen lost his left arm but led armies for years. The walking wounded warriors who could ride stayed with the army. Those who couldn't ride but could shoot might guard camp. Rashid al-Din wrote, quote, "Every warrior wounded in service to the Khan shall be cared for at the Khan's expense until he recovers or dies." European armies expected wounded soldiers to fend for themselves. You might lie on the battlefield for days, calling for help that would never come, slowly dying. Kyriakos described Mongol camps with sections for wounded soldiers receiving the same rations as active warriors. But imagine lying there, your body broken, watching comrades prepare for the next battle. You're still alive, still being fed, but you're not who you used to be. You'll never be that person again. Permanently disabled warriors could manage supplies, care for horses or train recruits, or return home with honorable discharge and war spoils. The cost of conquest. Let me give you some perspective on the scale we're talking about. During the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire between 1219 and 1221, the Mongol army numbered somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 warriors. The Persian sources suggest actual Mongol battle deaths were relatively light, maybe 10 to 15,000 killed. But here's what those numbers don't tell you. For every warrior who died in battle, there were probably 3 or 4 who were wounded. That means potentially 40 to 60,000 wounded men needing treatment. 40 to 60,000 men with arrows embedded in their flesh, sword cuts across their faces, broken bones, shattered limbs. Think about the logistics of that for a moment. Where do you put 60,000 wounded men? How do you feed them? How do you treat them when you only have a few dozen medical attendants? How do you keep wounds clean when you're camping in the open steppe with dust and flies everywhere? Even with their relatively effective medical practices, many of these men would have died from their wounds or from infections in the days and weeks after battles. Rashid al-Din wrote that after particularly bloody engagements, the medical attendants had to make terrible decisions. They had to choose who to treat and who to let die. Picture this: a young warrior with a deep sword cut across his chest. If you clean it, stitch it, bandage it properly, he'll probably survive. But right next to him is another man whose intestines are spilling out from a spear thrust. There's nothing anyone can do for him. He's going to die no matter what. So who gets the medical attendants' precious time and limited supplies? Warriors with the best chances of survival got priority treatment. Those who were unlikely to recover, who had wounds that were simply too severe, were often given a quick death instead. A dagger between the ribs. Fast, merciful in its own brutal way. Now imagine being the man making those decisions, looking into the eyes of a wounded warrior, a man you fought beside for years, and having to decide whether he lives or dies. You have to make that choice dozens of times after every major battle. How do you live with that? Or imagine being the wounded warrior, lying there in agony, watching the medical attendant walk past you to treat someone else, understanding in that moment what it means, knowing that you've just been sentenced to death, that you'll lie here for hours, maybe days, in terrible pain, until finally your body gives up and you die. What with the constant threat of terrible wounds, the complete lack of any pain relief during treatment, the high risk of infection from even minor injuries, the very real possibility of permanent disability, knowing you might be the one chosen to die so another man could live, and the certainty that capture by the enemy meant torture and execution. Being a Mongol warrior was one of the most dangerous occupations in the medieval world. The pain didn't end when the battle did. It continued in the medical tent, in the recovery camp, and for the rest of your life if you survived with a disability. It haunted the medical attendants who had to choose who lived and who died. But here's the thing that made it bearable. Unlike soldiers in many other medieval armies, Mongol warriors knew that if they fell wounded, their army wouldn't just abandon them to die alone on a battlefield. Someone would try to save them. Gelme sucking blood from a wound all night long. Companions tying you to a horse and carrying you to safety even as enemy arrows flew around them. Medical attendants working themselves to exhaustion, trying to save as many men as possible. And when that wasn't possible, when the wounds were too severe and there was no hope, those same brothers would grant you a quick death rather than let you suffer for days. It was brutal, it was horrible, but it was also, in its own way, the most merciful system any medieval army had. Thanks for watching Mongol Madness. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Mongol battlefield medicine, please subscribe to the channel. We put out videos like this every week exploring the real history behind the Mongol Empire. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great week.